easily old in health. So a place of longevity and well-being. And Italy is one of them, Greece, Japan, Costa Rica, and the Blue Zones project has been looking what are the combining factors which determine that people live so long in so much health. And most of these factors we've been talking about already. It's about their diet, about being in nature, getting a lot of sunshine, eating well, belonging to a group, but it has also to do with spirituality. So spirituality meaning either a religion or a personal view of life, of being in a group. All of that is a factor which you can see in all of these areas where people live longer in more health. So this I showed before. I work as a psychiatrist in outpatient clinic. We work with a group of people with a long history and with mostly mood and anxiety disorder and trauma. And I'm going to speak with you now about this part of it. So it's about the holistic view, which includes not only the biological, the psychological, the social, but also the spiritual aspect. So, let's start with a very simple question. What is the meaning of life? Difficult to answer. So this question, there was a very interesting research about this. They asked this to 500 people in the world which have a very influential position, like politicians, leaders of state, CEOs of big industries, scientists, whatever you like, YouTube influencers. Everybody was asked the same question. And the answers are so diverse, I would need about 10 slides to show you. And it ranges from being happy, getting a lot of money, surviving, loving people, making fun, you name it. So it means that this subject is very personal. It can really change between people about the meaning of life. But I think from a therapeutic position, like you are all therapists or to-be therapists, for me it's the elephant in the room. I don't know if you know this expression. It's everywhere, but we don't speak about it. And that's quite strange, I think. Because if you are working with a patient and they want to achieve something, either more healthy or better relationship or whatever it is, that is always connected to what is most important in life. Why do you want to be healthy? To be a good husband or wife, or to serve God, or work for world peace, or whatever it may be. But there's also always, behind everything we do or do not do, there is some kind of idea, is it important? And if the answer is yes, then it is connected to what is your meaning in life, because then it's important. And if you look at it this way, it's very strange that we start working with people, some for several years, talking about everything in life, from symptoms to drugs to whatever, sex. We ask them everything, but we rarely ask them, what is for you the meaning in life? Whereas this is the point on the horizon where we all aim for. So therefore it makes it, for me, this subject, the elephant in the room. So let's start from basics. I'm sorry this is in Dutch, but I'm sure you know Maslow, the basic needs, right? So just refreshment, physical needs, security, social, recognition, and self-realization, right? So these five, Lama Michel also referred to them this morning. Actually, this is not the whole story. There is a sixth one. Do you know? At the end of his life, Maslow formulated the sixth need. And that is self-transcendence. So the logic here is, first we need safety, we need whatever the body needs, then we need what the emotions and mind need, what we need in our life to become an individual and to fulfill our potential. But then the ultimate step is to contribute to something which is bigger than ourselves, to transcend our own perspective. And I think this is huge, because if we don't speak about this sixth aspect of Maslow, the need to go beyond the self, beyond my personal ego, but to contribute maybe for my family or my tribe or my country or world peace or whatever it may be, this is the sixth level. Maslow already talked about it at the end of his life. So for many people, until maybe 10 to 15 years ago, this subject, transcending your own needs, doing something for the greater good, was often put into practice in regards to a religion. I mentioned this also yesterday or the day before, that we see that 85% of the world population is connected to a religion, has a religious affiliation. In the last 20 years, this percentage has gone down. And now we see that more people in the population, they are called somethingists, which means, I don't know about if there's a God, maybe yes, maybe no, I don't know, but there's something there, right? This category is increasing, and less people are actually calling themselves Catholics or Protestants or Hindu or Muslim. But still a large group. And despite that so many people have a background or a connection to a religion, we see that in healthcare, especially mental health care, most patients say, I feel uncomfortable to talk about this with my therapist. Because if I do, they make fun of me or they don't take it seriously. So they have a negative experience. And there is not so much a match with their therapist in regard to religion. Because most professionals avoid talking about this. And Joke van Nieuw-Amerongen, she did her PhD research on this in the Netherlands, and she found out her major point was, it is important for us to address this because patients want this. They have a need to talk about everything that's important, and it also includes religion. Why would we talk about everything, including drugs and relations and sex, and not talk about religion? So we have to find a way to bridge this gap between patient needs and what we as professionals offer. So who's to blame? Whose fault is this? If we want to pinpoint one figure, I think it's this one. Who is this? Sigmund Freud. In his younger years. Most pictures are of his older years, but this is his younger years. And Sigmund Freud is always called the father of modern psychiatry. And I think he's still very influential. His position on religion was very negative. So he called it a sign of hysteria or regression or something else bad. It would always be a bad thing to be active with this. Luckily, he's not the only one who was influential. Of course, this is Carl Jung, remember of the archetypes, and William James. This was a very influential psychologist, one of the most influential 100 years ago. He said, we can experience something greater than ourselves, and in that moment found our greatest peace. So he was referring to a transcendence of the personal perspective, which could have a very strong effect on people. And Carl Jung, of course, was very influential with his words of archetypes and spirituality. But still, the man on the left was most influential. So until today, most psychiatrists are not religious. They ask mostly about religion. If you compare all doctors, psychiatrists ask the most questions about religion, looking for pathology. So they're not looking for like a coping or something that could be a strength, but we are looking for a sign of either psychosis, like a religious psychosis, or mania, or regression and hysteria. Of course, I'm generalizing, but this is mainly the point. On Friday, I also gave a talk about the brain and meditation, and I explained that if we look, why is the reason that we feel so uncomfortable with this subject? I think it has to do with the split between science and religion, which dates back to Copernicus, who showed that it is not the Earth is the center of our universe, but it's the sun. And this brought him into conflict with the church, because in the church and many scriptures of the church, it said that the Earth is the center. And Galileo Galilei from Italy also had the same problem. He thought the same thing, and that brought him to the Inquisition. So there's the origin. Then we have, as psychologists and psychiatrists, this uneasiness, maybe this feeling I should not talk about this. I don't know how to talk about this. We are not trained in it. And we also live in a time where we see a decline of religiousness. We see that people say, I'm some kind of spiritual, but I don't feel myself connected to a church or a religion. And there is the discussion, which is most important? Is it mind or matter? I think we see, if you look in newspapers, in TV, in radio, like in daily life, there is a domination of the material worldview. So only everything that is important can be traced back to molecules and something you can see or touch. So one of my colleagues said, we are our brains. That means the brain is the origin of our mind, and it's like brain activity that should cause consciousness. This is one view. I don't agree, but this is one view. And it's also in our language. So we say, does it matter? Means, is it important? So we see matter as importance. They don't bite, don't react. They are very kind insects. If you squeeze them, they smell very badly, so don't squeeze. And we also say, everybody here in the room. We don't say, every mind here in the room. That could be also the case. So we have, the language shows that we have a dominance of the material worldview. And we like science. But now the interesting thing comes, if you look even from a strict scientific point of view, there is still reason to look into religion and spirituality. Why is this? And do you know what is a survival curve? No. Okay. So what you see here, these are months. So this is about 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It's like about 5 years. And this is the probability of dying. Or other way put around, if the higher you stay, the less chance you have to die. And what they did in this research is to find to what extent people have a very clear life purpose. Or either are not spiritual or religious, but if they have a clear purpose, this is the most important in my life. Actually, the answer to the question I make it at the start. When people say, yes, I have a very clear picture, this is my life purpose, then people live longer, up to 4 years, which is quite large. So the more clear we have what is our life meant for, what is our life purpose, the longer we live. And the proof for these facts are now so strong that in real serious medical journals, they are now saying we should look into spirituality even in serious illnesses and disease. So for instance, Elkena showed this morning that now in palliative care, spirituality is really normal to speak. You're not a good therapist if you avoid it, right? This is in palliative care, but it's now also coming in other aspects of medicine. Even more so, if you look if there are interventions which have a religious part or a spiritual part, for instance, mindfulness or compassion or psychotherapy with an emphasis on spiritual aspects, then you can see in this meta-analysis that this has a very strong, significant effect on anxiety, a little bit less on depression, but still significant. So there is scientific evidence that you can do spiritual interventions to improve mental health. This is another study, and here you can see these are the studies about addiction. It works very well. Depression, anxiety, and stress. So we see now that it is not only polite to address spirituality, it's even evidence-based to address spirituality. So if you don't do, you're not practicing evidence-based medicine because you are avoiding something for which there is evidence. So to summarize why we should look into this, we live 4 to 6 years longer. We have better physical and mental health if we have a clear spiritual or religious denomination, a better quality of life, less anxiety, less depression, less suicide, less addiction, better recovery, better outcomes. It even seems to prevent psychopathology. So if you are more spiritual, you seem less prone to become depressed or feel anxiety. It may also offer a coping style to deal with difficulties. And it increases social coherence, volunteerism, and a healthy lifestyle. So there is a lot of reason to look into this matter, but somehow we don't really do. And we tend still to avoid. I even showed the first night that it's being active with these kind of practices changes not only the functioning of your brain, but also the structure of your brain. So I showed, for instance, that people with meditation or spiritual experiences, they have a change in their frontal lobes. So for instance, remember this is the brain, and this part of the frontal lobe is the youngest part of our brain. In evolution it came latest. And this is in human, it is far bigger than in animals. So the frontal lobe in human is about 35%, almost one third of the brain. But for animals it's about 5%. So we have, and one of the functions is to be aware of what you're doing and to direct and make decisions. So if you have a decision, I should not go on my social media so much because Lama Michel has explained this to me this morning, then it's around here that we make this decision. It's in the frontal lobe, specifically the medial prefrontal cortex. And now what we see, that people who have a spiritual experience, they have a decrease in this activity, meaning that they have some kind of feeling of surrender, not so much control anymore of what they are doing. In the parietal and occipital lobe, these areas, here and here, we see that the sense of self changes. So if I have a oneness experience with the world, I feel that the boundaries between myself and the other are dissolving, then we see activation in these areas. And the insula, which is in here, 2 centimeters inside, that has to do with our interior state, how we feel about ourselves inside. So again, there is neural correlates, or we see that the brain also is different when we have spiritual and religious experiences. But back to daily life, this is what most of us experience in a normal day, right? So in the morning it's rush hour, we have to be on time in our work or our study, we have to go through the traffic, we have to answer all the apps and the other kind of messages we get. We are overstimulated, we are multitasking, we are running around, we have to study, we have a relationship, we have family, we have to work, we have to do everything, and we feel stressed, excited, overstimulated, and before you know it, life passes by. Either we are sleeping or we are awake, distracted, and then maybe you have this idea, when I retire later in my life, then I will have the time to relax, do my hobby, be there for my children or something like this. But it doesn't always happen like this. And I didn't prepare this just now. I already had before, but I was very happy with Laurent Michel's talk this morning, because he explained to us that we don't know when death comes. We usually have this idea, I'm still young, but there's no guarantee we don't die, or we get sick, or we get a big accident. So what many people have, we all can have, is we are so absorbed in life and stress and doing everything that life goes by until something happens. Something happens that really makes us awake, that we cannot go on anymore like this, that death is coming, or we lose something, and then this gives some kind of clarity in the mind. I've talked to many people who have gone through tremendous suffering and loss. Sometimes a very young people dying, a child dying, and some people have some kind of weird feeling that even though it was a terrible thing to go through, there was some quality about the experience. There's a lot of clarity in the mind that they even miss afterwards. This is the effect of getting a shock where the monkey mind and the default brain is calming down and we see things how they really are and what is most important for us. The sad thing is, it mostly does not happen. So what happens? Time goes by, and then one day we are almost dying. And there is a very beautiful book about a nurse who wrote down what she heard people say on their deathbed. So she asked them, is there any regret you might have about your life? And nobody said, I wanted to have one more sex, or I should have gone to bungee jumping, or take more cocaine, or buy shoes. So everything that's connected to dopamine, nobody said. The typical things people said, I would have wanted to allow myself to be more happy, spend more time with my friends, express my emotions. I wish I should not have worked so much, and I would have followed my own path instead of answering the needs of others. Like people have expectations of me, my father, my mother, my grandfather, my whatever, and I didn't really do what I wanted to do myself. These are the 5 regrets of the dying. Of course, not everybody who dies has regrets. There are people who are very clear and satisfied with their lives. But most people who are not, it's one of these 5. So why am I saying this? It might be a little bit depressing. I'm saying this because the beauty of spirituality is we don't have to wait till we die. We don't have to wait till cancer comes, or an accident comes, or our husband leaves us, or whatever might happen. Spirituality is about realizing this every day and taking advantage of thinking about it so you have clear what is the thing that is most important in my life. The same clarity people have who go through all of the suffering, this clarity we can induce in ourselves if we think about this. It maybe sounds like a little bit morbid to imagine your own death, but actually it's something that has a lot of value. If we think about my own death, not as a theory, but something that can happen soon, then the thought might come, oh, before I die, I need to do this. And then you are at where you are, what is most important for you. So the threat of dying gives clarity of what is most important, and thinking about it makes life more worthwhile. And this is, I think, one of the aspects of spirituality which is useful. There's somebody who made this very clear. This man. He's called Viktor Frankl. Anybody know him? Yeah. So he is most famous because he was a psychiatrist during the Second World War. and he was a Jew. So he was taken to Auschwitz and also to other concentration camps. But as he was a psychiatrist and a doctor, he was also useful for the Germans. So they asked him to hang around a little bit and to help them out with things. So he stayed there for a longer time. And he saw people come and go with the trains. And then one day he noticed that he could make some kind of prediction if people would come in, if they would make it or not make it. And then he said, later he realized that people who have a clear why to live, a clear life purpose, a clear answer to the question I said at the beginning, what is the meaning of life? The chances that they would survive were bigger than those who had not a clear picture. So that means that when things get really bad, we need a clear why to hold on to and to go for. For some people it was to see my wife again or to hug my grandchild or whatever. For himself it was to publish a book because the Germans took away his manuscript and they destroyed it. So I have to finish my book. It was something that kept him going. And if you look at it this way, spirituality or purpose of life is not fake anymore. It is the difference between life and death, as clear as it can get. Later, his work was extended. So on the top of this pyramid, you see the work of Viktor Frankl. And that means that we need to have a sense of meaningfulness, a clear why in our lives. But not only a why, we also need a way to be able to direct our own behavior and to have some kind of control, some kind of management of our lives. And we need to understand how the world works, a sense of comprehensibility. So these three together, understanding why, being able to have some kind of influence, and the understanding, this gives us a clear coherence, a sense of coherence, and this predicts health. These three factors are the strongest predictors of mental health. We spoke these days a lot about physical health, diet, sleeping, no stress, etc. These three, if we have this, we have a clear sense of mental health and life purpose. And there's one model I even like a little bit more, because it's very practical and very deep as well. This is Ikigai. Do you know this one? Anyone? No. If you think what I'm going to do with my life, this is a good model. I will explain. Ikigai is an Eastern concept, and it means, they ask you, do you have Ikigai? Means, do you have clear how you can contribute to the world in a way that fits with you, is also needed. The center, I'm not sure it still works, yeah. Where we are good at, what we love to do, what the world needs, and where we can be paid for. Very practical. So these four circles, they intersect. And if we have all of these four, then we are in the center in our Ikigai. But if, for instance, we are doing something which we love to do, where we are good at, what the world needs, but we cannot pay for it, then we are here, and that means delight and fullness, but no pay, no job. On the other hand, if we can be paid for it, we are good at it, and the world needs it, but we don't love to do it, then we are here, comfortable, but a feeling of emptiness. If we love to do, we are good at it, and we can be paid for, but the world doesn't need it, then satisfaction, but no feeling of a positive impact on the world. And the last one is excitement, but feelings of uncertainty, because we are doing something that we are not good at. So our Ikigai, our meaning of life, purpose of life, our transcending our own perspective for the greater good, we need these four factors, and then we are in our ikigai. And the beauty of this is not only theory, there's even a good study in a very serious journal showing that people who have ikigai, again, live longer. So fascinating that like life purpose, spiritual ikigai, it's always to be more healthy and to live longer. It has all to do with the first question, what is the meaning of life? What is most important for you in life? That was an Eastern perspective. I also have the same story, but now from a Western perspective. Does anybody know Joseph Campbell? Hero's Journey. The hero with 1,000 faces. No. Also something to look into. All of these examples I'm giving, to do justice, I should talk a week about it, but I'm going to give you the essence of the essence. Joseph Campbell was a writer who was very poor in about 100 years ago. And so during the 1920s, he didn't have a job, and then there was the Great World Recession. There was the Depression, they called it. So there were no jobs. And he decided to make his life and his time meaningful by dividing his days into 3 blocks of 4 hours. 4 hours break, 4 hours, 4 hours. And he would read all different kind of fairy tales, magical stories he could find, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, 5 years long. So he read everything he could read about folk tales, mystical stories, all of these kind of things. And when he finished this, he had some kind of realization that there is one story which explains human experiences, which fits with all the stories. There is one thread, one plot, which is in all stories. This is called the monomyth, or the hero's journey. And this has all to do with finding your ikigai, finding what is most important in life, where you can contribute. And it starts, we just talked a little bit during the lunch, it starts with the call to adventure. Something happens where you know, I have to do something. This can be illness, but can also be in a story more magical. So for instance, Harry Potter receives a letter to the mailbox, you know? So the letter is a call to adventure to come to Hogwarts and to do his magic. And The Matrix, did you see the film The Matrix? Then Neo has to take a blue pill or a red pill. And this is the call to adventure. And so goes on and on. And Frodo gets a ring. I can give you 10 of examples. This is the call to adventure. What happens when we get a call? Fear is coming. This is going to mean a lot. These things are going to change. I'm not sure I can make it. I don't want it. I do like this. What happens if we refuse the call? It gets stronger. What happens when there is one letter going to Harry Potter and the family takes it away? Thousands of letters are coming. Did you see this? The whole mailbox. So the call gets louder, or what can also happen, the call gets softer and it goes away and it manifests in trouble, illness, malfortune, these kind of things. If we take the call, we go past a threshold. So we have to go dive into something. Usually it's a cave or an ocean or the underworld where we have to go inside. But before we do, there are the keepers of the old order. And they say, no nice adventure for you. You are married to me. You're going to make sure that there's dinner on the table tonight. And our children have to go to bed. No adventures. Or you like to do integrative medicine, I'm a skeptic, you are not allowed to do, we don't pay for it, and I will put you to malpractice problems, etc. So there are the keepers of the old tradition, the guardians. And if we manage to pass them, then we have to surrender. And then we can go either underground. Alice in Wonderland follows a white rabbit and goes under by the tree. And Jonas, do you know Jonas and the whale? He is swallowed by the whale. This is also the underworld. All kind of examples. And then if we are there, what we have to do in the underworld, we have to go through the road of trials. There is a series of difficulties we have to encounter. And this is very similar when you do psychotherapy. When we do psychotherapy, we ask the patient to go into the unconscious and to work through old traumas. This is the same idea. The road of trials is about having to go through difficulties, and finally, the end of this trial, you will meet the dragon. And the dragon is there, and he is the personification of your biggest fear. And this is the one we need to conquer. Maybe with the sword of Arthur. You know Arthur on the Round Table? He had a magical sword who could slay the dragon. And that means if we manage to slay the dragon, then after the dragon there is our reward, or eternal youth, or wisdom, something which is very precious to us, which we have to take up to the upper world, and then we bring to integrate in our lives and make it better for ourselves and for people who are close to us. So then we have to go again here. There are basically 17 steps. I will not go into detail, but if you like the story, you should read the book. It's very interesting, and it helps you to explain also going through the unconscious and working through trauma. Joseph Campbell says, the one who goes on this journey, the moment he is really on his journey, or she, then there is the ignition of fire, of inner fire. If you are caught on your adventure, you go for it, then there is some kind of strength coming, some kind of determination that you don't need the other basic needs of Maslow anymore. You don't care so much about food or sleeping or eating and drinking, you just go for your adventure. It's like a higher order taking over. This story makes it clear that we have to follow our bliss, because when we are on our adventure, we follow our bliss, and this brings us to aspects of ourselves with which we can contribute to our society and bring something for the greater good, our spirituality. So, back to the main point. What is the most important? What is the meaning of life? What is our spirituality? There are many definitions, and one I like very much is this one. Spirituality is the dynamic dimension of human life that relates to the way the persons, either as an individual or a community, experience, express, and or seek meaning, purpose, and transcendence, and the way they connect to the moment, to self, the other, to nature, or to the significant and sacred. It's a very long one, but it's beautiful because many things are inside. For instance, if we are not connected to this moment, then we are unaware and life just passes by, as I just explained. And then you may find yourself on your deathbed or in a situation of great difficulty, having to think about awareness and what do I want with life. So meditation, awareness, mindfulness can help us with these aspects of being in the moment, in the present moment, also in the physical body. Connection to self relates to knowing who we are and what we are here to do. And I see now in our world many people who have a difficulty with this. So identity and knowing what to do is an issue for many young people in this world today. And there are a lot of things you can do, also meditation, but also a vision quest, a pilgrimage, or creative expression are all things to help to reconnect to the self. Then if we don't manage, we get so alienated from ourselves, it could even lead to suicide, because we don't know how to deal anymore. If we don't know how to relate to others, we get fight and even homicide, killing each other, because we are not tolerate to the other perspective. And there are a lot of practices, spiritual practices, for instance, deep listening, who can help us to be able to connect to the other person and overcome this problem. And if we are not connected to nature, then we might think that we can exploit nature without suffering the consequences. And then we need to reconnect and be aware that we are part of nature. One of my friends once said very beautifully, we are committing ecocide to the illusion of separateness, which means we are killing ourselves through the ecosystem because we have the illusion that we are separated from it and we can exploit it without suffering the consequences. And if you want to change this, exposure to nature and wildlife can help us to become aware again that we are not on top of the earth, but we are part of nature. And then, of course, the significant other or the sacred, or the transcendent level. The part of transcendence is often not so good understood. What is meant by transcending? Transcending means to overcome, to go beyond. And this can be transcendence of the material level, which means we have to go to the spiritual level or the level beyond life and death. It can be transcendent of daily life, to do something which is far more important than daily life, or transcendence of our own ego, our own perspective. And people who manage to do so, they will call these moments something like flow or bliss or oneness or peak or awe. These are all words which point towards a sensation that you're not only connected, not only fixed in your own perspective, but you are somehow part of a bigger picture. This morning, Lama Michel spoke about the monastery where he was doing the debates. And he said when he was doing the debates, after some hours he would forget himself, forget the people he was debating with, and he was in some kind of higher state. This is transcendence. This is a very good example of having a peak experience which helps us to overcome the personal and reach the 6th level of Maslow, which you didn't learn in university, but which is there. And again, this is William James. We can experience something greater than ourselves, and in that moment find our greatest peace. Greatest peace we do not find in our own ego, in our own identity, but when we feel we are connected to a larger whole, a community or life itself. These are also called altered states of consciousness. And this word has become more popular with the revival of psychedelics. Which means substances which can change our consciousness. And I'd like to say a few words about this. So, another state of consciousness is something that can be induced in a normal way, in a physiological way. It can be induced by substances. It can be induced through psychological interventions. It can come spontaneous, but it can also be part of a psychological, pathological phenomena like epilepsy or brain damage or psychosis. These are all different kinds of having a different state of consciousness. So when we sleep, we are still conscious, but the consciousness is in a dream world. Fasting and sex are also experiences where we have a different consciousness. But also when we use psychedelics, I'll come back to that later. When we do music, hypnosis, a vision quest, all kinds of things from traditional cultures, or daydreaming, having a mystical experience, and in these psychological pathological states. These are all different ways to experience a change in consciousness. Why talk about this? Well, because we know that when you can change consciousness, you can use this to heal. So we know that changing consciousness can be very helpful, healing trauma, healing mental disorders. We've known this, for instance, for tens of years through hypnosis. It's also a change of consciousness. Now we have EMDR. EMDR uses also a change of our normal consciousness. And these are all factors which can help us with that. And this can improve your well-being. Okay, now we do a little bit test. Who knows one psychedelic? Don't tell me you don't know. Acid? Mushrooms? Either you are all very good students or you don't dare to say because the teachers are here. Sorry? Yes, THC. This is a component of cannabis, of marijuana. Yes, there are different components. Sure. Anybody hear about ayahuasca? Or ecstasy? Or LSD? Or ketamine? These are all substances. Here are a few examples. So we have ecstasy. Many people who go out, they use this. Cannabis, also called marijuana, ketamine, LSD, psilocybin in magic mushrooms is this one. Ayahuasca, peyote is cactus, ibogaine. There are many, many, many. And usually these substances were used by traditional cultures, not to make fun, but because they have healing properties. Because they change our consciousness. And these should not be used just like this, but also in a context, which means with the intention to heal during the nighttime, sitting together, doing rituals. All of this together gives the effect. But these are now studied again in the last years because it seems that for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and for depression, and for addiction, these seem to be very effective, especially in people where normal psychiatry didn't be so effective. So, who has an experience? Nobody? Anyone ever took? Yeah. Ah, very short ago. Okay. And how did it go?
It was interesting. The colors were brighter. When I closed my eyes, I would see like a snowflake. The conversations that I had, I felt like I was able to make more connections.
Right. So I will repeat because for the translation also. So you're saying that your experience, you had more bright colors and more? Deeper thoughts and more connection, you also mentioned. Right. So these are typically things which are reported having a kind of trip on these substances. A lot of people who take these substances have a good effect, but not always. You can have what we call a bad trip. This can depend on what you have taken, but also the way it's being used, and also depends on your own past. For instance, if you have a lot of trauma, then it can be sometimes difficult. I'm not sure everybody is very open at this moment, because if we look on a population level, we see, this is an example from America, that lifetime LSD use is more than 10% now. So more than 1 in 10 Americans has used LSD. We see that pedos, like magic mushrooms, are increasing a lot, also about 8 to 9% of the population. and mescaline and peyote are less used. But basically, a lot of people are using, and now also in the big cities. Usually, not only for healing, also for recreational use and experimenting, or for personal development. And I would say that if you look at the literature, there's quite some science on this. Many people have good effects, but not always. So you have to be aware what you take, how you take, with who you take, and also depending on your own health and prior well-being. But I think we have to be honest that many people report quite strong effects. So I saw that most people report, if they have a trip, it to be one of the 5 most important events in their lives. On the same level of getting a child, getting married, something like this. And this even stays, if you ask again 10 years later, it's still the same. So this is quite special. It means there's a lot of power in the mind. On the other side, I have a little bit concern because sometimes it is not so much used in a respectful way. It's only like making fun or making money. The second thing is you're not sure if the things you are getting are of good quality. They can be polluted and people can die. But maybe more fundamentally, you have to use something from outside to have an inner experience. I'm not really against it, but on a fundamental level, it would even be better to have something which you can do inside yourself with your mind, having this experience, than having to take a substance from outside. And that is interesting because we know that not only people have very special trips and God encounter experiences with psychedelics, but it also happens spontaneously. And I think some of the things which are called in religions like an appearance of Maria or Jesus, or maybe in Mexico it's called Guadalupe, or in Tibet it's called Tara. All these kind of appearances are, I think, some kind of altered states of consciousness of people who have experienced it, but they have given words to it depending on their own culture and their own tradition or religion. But they are more or less the same. And the interesting thing is we can also we can induce altered states of consciousness without using psychedelics, by meditation, by fasting, singing, dancing. So the Indians used to do the drums, and it's quite interesting if you now look at like a club in, let's say, Milano, where people take ecstasy and they look at listen to house, and you look at this scenery in the night, rhythmic music, getting into ecstasy, and then you look at the old Indians in the night, drumming with rhythms, getting into ecstasy, no? So it's in a way, it's funny that we are using in different ways in our time, but I think it has been through all times that we knew that changing our consciousness, either or not with substances, can have a healing property and can help us also to be more clear on what is important. One of my colleagues told me that 13 years ago he did a trip on ayahuasca or psilocybin, I'm not sure, one of the two. And then it turned him into an overnight vegetarian. This has been reported many times. That means that people they have a very strong trip with psychedelics, and they realize how much they feel connected to the natural world and animals, that at that moment they decide never to eat or kill animals anymore, and it stays. And this is quite interesting, I think, also for us as psychologists and psychiatrists. We have so much difficulty to change behavior of people. These guys take one pill or and for 13 years a huge change of behavior. It's quite amazing, actually. Not everybody has this, of course. Depends very much on your own mindset, but it happens. Okay, so how does all of this relate to being a professional in mental health care. Some years ago, the World Psychiatric Association has adopted a position statement which summarizes how we should behave and work with these things I've been telling you in the last half hour. So, as professionals, we should have a consideration of patients' beliefs and religious systems, as well as their spirituality, and routinely should ask about this during our interviews. Just ask people, do you have a spiritual tradition, or do you have a religion, or something we should take into account when we are treating you? We should understand that religion and spirituality can have an influence and relationship with the diagnosis, the etiology, and the treatment of disorders. So, in other words, if people are very religious or not, or very spiritual or not, also depends the course of a depression or an anxiety and how they respond to treatment. So this should be taken into account. Of course, there are still many questions, so we need to do more research on the effects. I showed you a few in the last 2 days. And it should be part of a person-centered approach. So be very careful not to address this issue in a way that patient may think that they should be religious or should not be religious, or that one religion is better than the other, or being an atheist is better than being a humanist, or whatever. So we should be open, receptive, and non-judgmental for the patients. Then it should be good for us to work with leaders or members of faith communities, chaplains and pastoral workers. And remember Elkena's story this morning, when she talked about this patient who was about to die and she was being baptized. That was an example of working together with pastoral workers and to do something for people who feel this need to be baptized. We cannot do everything ourselves. We are not priests or lamas, so we should not try to do this ourselves, but we have to address the issue, and then if there's a need, refer to people who do. Of course, be aware of it, respectful and sensitivity. And also, I need to mention, not everyone who has an experience with religion or spirituality has a good experience. Religion for some people can also be very distressful. For instance, when you have a different view than your parents or your family or your spouse. Or some people feel very fearful or threatened by spirituality. So we need to know it can be an aspect of coping style, it can also be distressful. So both there are benefits and harm in this subject. So my very short summary for all of us as therapists: have an open, receptive, respectful, not knowing attitudes, so we don't impose our own ideas how it should be, but just asking how it works for the patient, a patient-centered approach. Address spirituality, but refrain from judgment. So ask if people like to involve it in their care, if it's important to them. If you look for diagnosis, there are a few questionnaires, very short, very useful questionnaires, which can help you to address the issue. So if you Google on FICA, Spirit, Hope, these 3 are very short, 6 or 7 questions, which help you to talk with patients about this subject. For those in mental health care, we have the cultural formulation interview with also an aspect of spirituality. And of course, there are a few interventions which are related: mindfulness, compassion, yoga, acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, creative expression therapy, psychotherapy, which can be used. So in this regard, there's also something to offer to patients. And I showed before that there's even, on the level of a meta-analysis, evidence for some of these interventions. But be careful, because it's not only a party. And I have also seen in my career, somehow I have some kind of aspect of me draws people with questions about these issues. So I've seen many people with these issues, and some of them were very vulnerable. or they were in a sect where they were disconnected from their families and had negative experiences, or they were abused, or they were with fake gurus, or there can be also negative things. It's not only a party, but if we take these things into account and we help to involve patients in a non-judgmental way, it can help. Okay, this is double. So, to conclude, following up on what Dame Michel said this morning, I think spirituality is not only, but it is also about remembering death. Not as a theory that happens to some people who are old, but our own death, and it can be very soon. If we really feel this inside, it will make it very clear for us what is most important. One exercise is, think you go to the doctor and he says you have 3 more months to live. If you really know this, what would you do with the last 3 months? If you would change a lot in your life, this is an indication that we need to be more aware of our spirituality. And stay aware of what is most important, so when we go to die, we will not have one of the 5 regrets I mentioned before. Not allowing ourselves to be happy, not have taken enough time with our friends, expressing our emotions, doing what really we want for ourselves, and not work too much. So when your time comes, you are ready. But before your time comes, now that we are still alive, hopefully for many, many years, my take-home message is, I think the meaning of life, one of the meaning of life, is to find your own gift. The thing that you can contribute to this world, to people around you. And you can find it by following your bliss, as Joseph Campbell said, following your sense of coherence, as Viktor Frankl and others said, or following your ikigai. Maybe you remember the model I showed you before. These are models which can help us to find our gift. And then the purpose of life is to give our gift away to the world and to others and make a better world. So I thank you for your attention. And is there any question?
I was wondering if there were any studies about the negative aspects of spirituality. So what happens to the person when spirituality is not a functional coping mechanism? What happens to the brain?
Yes. So the question is, are there any studies about a bad trip or bad aspects of spirituality? What happens to people? What happens in the brain? What happens with their health? I think there are now some projects on the way. And I think it's also good, because when we have a new treatment and you do research on the treatment, you always look at what's beneficial, but you also look at the side effects. So we do the same for this. I know there is one project, it's called The Dark Night of the Soul. You can find it on the internet, The Dark Night of the Soul. I talked to 2 researchers who initiated this project. It was a few years ago, we had a big conference in Amsterdam on mindfulness. And in those years, everybody was more or less idealizing mindfulness. It's good for everything, mindful eating, mindful this, mindful this. Then somebody asked, is it only beneficial or can there be side effects? And so they wrote a small paper, I think it was even on LinkedIn or something, some kind of social media. Don't tell Lama Michel. And then they got thousands of responses of people around the world who were wondering that they were crazy because they had negative effects, but it was never ever mentioned before. So they collected all of these stories. It's called The Dark Night of the Soul. So yes, it's there. I think there are several things we can do to make the chance of it happening smaller. It's similar to every different kind of lifestyle change we make. If I go to exercise and I do without using my brain, I just go running around, I can break my leg, I can have a heart attack, I can have many things. If I go step by step, I have a trainer, the chances of problems are smaller. Same is true for spirituality and mindfulness. So if you take a lot of sense, one other example comes to my mind. Some people tell me, oh, I like so much to do meditation sessions. I never had the time, never have the time. I have booked a flight to Thailand, and I will do now for 3 weeks, 10 hours a day. I think better not. Because if you go from 0 to a lot, then you cannot control your mind. It won't be a good experience for many people. So go slow, know where is your limit, use your rational mind as well, and ask people who are professionals. If we do this, the chances of side effects are small, much smaller than taking medication. But it is not 0, so we have to be aware. Yeah. Other questions? Ah, in Utrecht.
Yes, and so I was wondering about the cooperation between the psychiatrists and the non-medical mental caretakers. We call them geestelijke verzorgers.
Yes.
How do you look upon that?
Yes. So the question is, how do you work together with pastoral workers and people, geestelijke verzorgers? I'm not sure the English word is for geestelijke verzorgers. Okay, so people who are trained in talking with religion and helping patients with dealing with these issues. Yeah. This is an important question because when we started talking about this, many of these workers who have been working for 30, 40 years already in mental health care said, hey, happy you also joined the party, we're already doing this for many years. So why don't you take a course in our work? This is true to some extent. So I think you could see these two professions as there's like a border between the two. It shouldn't be fixed. I think there's some overlap there. So we should be careful not to try to do their work. So if there's a complicated issue, for instance, somebody was very strongly raised with a religious background and now feels the need to be an atheist or a humanist or a spiritual guy or whatever, and has a lot of issues and don't know what to do and want to look at the Bible, this would be not so much for a psychiatrist, but maybe more for the geestelijk verzorger. So there's some work done on which kind of issues should be addressed by the one group and which should be addressed by the others. And they are made also by the professional group of the geestverzorgers. I know about this. So my point would be, as therapists, we need to be aware of the possible benefits of spirituality, the possible dangers as well, where people can get their information, and if it's complex and it takes more time, we have to refer to people who are more knowledgeable than us. That would be the summary. Any other questions? Then thank you for your attention, and we have a small break.